I enjoy videos by Bob Smeerfak, but not really.
Hello, I'm Bob Smeerfak, but not really. This series is designed for theological seminary students with approaching exams who have not had time to read the Bible, and for religious portrait artists looking for hard evidence that Jesus was a Caucasian of Western European descent with a great haircut. Matthew, chapter 21. Let's go. In this chapter, the fabulous Jesus boys were closing in on Jerusalem when they hit a spot on the map called Bethpage and rolled up to the Mount of Olives. So Jesus selected a two-man team for a special assignment: infiltrate the next village over and procure a set of wheels for the ride into J-Town. This ride would consist of a jenny and a foal, and if they met any resistance, just tell the guy, hey, the boss needs these donkeys, and that'll be good enough for the guy. And it was all going to go down this way to make sure that a dude who had foreseen the future a long time ago was right when he had made the announcement that Sion's daughter should check it out because her monarch was coming to town all mild-mannered and riding on a donkey and its offspring. So the J-Man's boys executed the mission, and when they brought back the donkeys, they made them more comfortable to sit on by piling their own robes on top, and they boosted Jesus up in the saddle. As it turns out, there were plenty of people just dying to get their clothes dirty for a good cause, because they all laid theirs out on the road for the donkeys to walk across. Other people thought it was a good idea to do some pruning for Jesus, and they cut down a bunch of limbs to spread across the road. It's probably good that no one else threw down a layer of debris, as there's got to be a point at which an homage becomes a barricade. Anyway, they had a big parade with tons of people in front and tons behind, and Jesus in the middle as the Grand Marshal, and they chanted a bunch of really flattering slogans about Jesus and his non-DNA heritage going all the way back to that paragon of family values, King David. Naturally, on their way into town, they caused a big stir with the city folk, who checked in with them and asked, who's this guy? The crowd spelled it out. This here's Jesus, a guy with his finger on the pulse of the future, from the Nazareth section of Galilee. Then Jesus made his way into the building where folks worshipped his dad, or the other one-third of his three-part self, depending on how you look at it. And there were a lot of extracurricular business activities going on. He totally went Christian Bale on some dudes running a currency exchange, and he threw their furniture around. And then he knocked over a bunch of chairs where some guys were selling pigeons, all while laying down a rant about how you could read in a scroll somewhere that the owner of this joint meant for it to be a place where people could whisper up through the roof at him. But Jesus said they had basically turned it into a frat house for shoplifters. Now, if you had an alcoholic dad who liked to beat you with a belt buckle one moment and then cuddle you the next, what the J-Men did next will be no mystery to you. He went into full healing mode, vision improvements for one group of people, and limb regeneration for another group. Problem was, this all happened right in front of the top religious hoo-haws. They got a whiff of Jesus' mojo and listened to a crowd of kids in the church wailing about how Jesus was directly descended from King David, at least up to the part where his dad Joseph was cock-blocked by the Holy Spirit. Maybe they didn't know that, or just didn't have time. Anyway, it was enough to piss off the chief priests big time. They checked in with Jesus. Do you have any idea what these people are saying about you? Jesus said, yep, what are you telling me, you didn't read the divinely inspired pamphlet which predicted toddlers and infants would be the ones saying the nicest stuff about me? Jesus had had enough at this point and checked out. He hauled out to the suburbs to get some sleep in a town called Bethany. It's not certain why he trekked all the way out there when he was planning to come right back to J-Town the next morning, but you could imagine he had reasons. It was quieter, the rates were lower. Wherever he stayed must not have had free coffee and donuts, though, because on the hike back into the city the next day he was jonesing for a snack. He spotted a fruit tree of the genus Ficus, which should have meant score, but upon detouring over there he came up zip on figs. Only leaves. He must not have been in the mood for a salad, and he must have had a knack for communicating with plant life, because he told the thing directly. Its fruiting days were over, for good. This is terrible news for a fig tree, as evidenced by the fact that it up and died right there. Now, Jesus' troops saw the whole thing. They were in no small way impressed, and they remarked about its record-breaking withering time. But Jesus said, this is nothing. Word up. If you're willing to believe in things you have no proof of, I mean, like, fully, then scorching a few branches on a ficus will be child's play. Indeed, you'll be able to tell a huge landmass that projects well above its surroundings to get lost and go take a swim. In fact, everything you ask for by way of a divine requisition, if you have your confidence turned up to 11, you're going to get. Okay, it's not a commentator's job to speculate, but this one's obvious. The whole sequence, the overnight to Bethany, followed by a morning of botanical destruction on an empty stomach, was planned from the start as a teaching tool for the Jesus boys. Why else would an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent being hoof it all the way to the sticks to crash at a bed and breakfast without a breakfast, then hike all the way back past an orchard, but instead of feeding himself by miraculously causing a barren tree to fruit up, choose instead to humiliate it to death with smack talk, and therefore therefore go hungry. Was it divine planning or bad logistics? Will you be the first to cast that stone? I didn't think so. Anyway, Jesus made his second appearance in as many days at the church house. But while he was laying down a little education for the people there, the big religious hoo-haws and some respected older guys from the community popped in and interrupted his class. They wanted to know what his credentials were and who had issued his teaching certificate. So Jesus agreed to a little tit for tat. He said, "You answer my question and I'll answer yours." He went first. He said, "That guy whose head was chopped off as a gift to Herod's wife back in chapter 14, when that guy used to hold people underwater, was he hooked up to God's power station or did he get his mojo from regular dudes?" The hoo-haws huddled up and hashed out the implications. A, we could say Johnny the Baptist had the heavenly hookup, but the J-Man's going to ask us why we didn't pay any attention to him. Or B, we could say Johnny got his mojo earthside, but then we have to worry about the general populace because they all think he's clairvoyant. So C, they punted. We don't know. So Jesus punted. Then I'm not telling you where I got my certification. But he said, "What do you think of this?" And he lobbed out a parable. A particular guy had a couple of male offspring, and he ordered the first kid to go pick grapes. The kid said, "Forget it." But then he thought better of it and headed out to pick grapes. The guy then gave the same order to the other kid, who said, "You got it, Dad." But then he sat on his ass. So Jesus quizzed them. Which of these kids did what their dad asked? So they said, "The first kid." Then Jesus retorted, "True fact. IRS workers and women who have sex for a living are going to make it into the sky house before you guys. Because Mr. Baptist came at you straight from the heart and you were like, "Meh." But the tax people and sex workers thought he was telling the truth. And you watched the whole thing and still didn't change your mind. So Jesus told them to put another parable in their pipe and smoke it. A dude who had an estate grew a shitload of grapes on it, surrounded it with shrubs, installed a machine to turn the grapes into wine, built a nice house, rented the joint out to tenant farmers, then took a long trip. When it was almost time to pick the grapes, he sent some lackeys back to the renters to collect some profit. But the tenant farmers smacked the shit out of one dude, murdered another dude, and stoned a third guy. And not with cannabis either. It's clear these renters were at least as serious about their ass-kicking as they were about making wine. So the owner tried it again. More lackeys. And the farmers tried it again. More ass-kicking and murdering and stoning. But the owner was not yet fully convinced that these were truly bad men who could make an episode of Sons of Anarchy look like Captain Kangaroo. So he told his son to go give them another chance. He thought they'd surely show him some goodwill. It's not clear whether he told the kid what happened to the first two delegations of envoys he sent over there, but it's very clear that when the sociopathic tenant farmers saw the boy, they knew they'd hit the jackpot. They said, "This is the kid who's one step away from the old man's bank account. Let's do him and grab the whole thing." It's not clear why they thought the young man might be carrying around his entire inheritance, but it's very clear that they nabbed the kid, kicked him off his own property, and then popped a cap in his ass. So then, Jesus put a question to the hoo-haws and the elders. When the old man finally comes back around, what's he going to do to these farmers-turned-motorcycle gang? The elders and hoo-haws could have shot back that if the old man was stupid enough to come home after 3 grisly slaughters had occurred in his own vineyard, he probably deserved whatever the Hells Angels had in mind for him. But they didn't. Instead, they said the owner would get medieval on those misbehaving farmers, and then rent the place out again to nice farmers who knew how to turn in their profits when the time came. Which says that if the hoo-haws assumed the owner had those kinds of superpowers, then he probably made the connection Jesus had in mind, that the owner was equivalent to the supreme being of the universe. But Jesus gave them the bottom line. Apparently, they'd skipped over the part in the Holy Book where it said there was a slab that some construction guys tossed out that ended up becoming the whole foundation, and people would be calling it the most awesome cornerstone ever. So he told them they were going to get booted off God's reality show, and their spot was going to be offered to some more qualified contestants. Then Jesus gave them some detailed properties of this cornerstone, like how if you fell on it, you'd maybe break your arm, but if it fell on you, you were toast. It was at this moment the lights turned on for the Pharisees and priests. They suddenly realized, hey, he's been talking about us this whole time. So they started to make their move to perform a citizen's arrest, but then they got skittish about the crowd, who obviously thought Jesus had special powers. Next in this series, we'll move on to chapter 22. Spoiler alert. If Saddam invites you to his son Uday's wedding, think twice before you say you've got other plans, and wear something nice. As always, I'm not a religious figure, but if you want me to save you or damn you to hell, I'll do my best.
I despise everything you say and do. I would even hate your thoughts if you actually had any. So there, Bob Smeerfak, take that, you brutish oaf.